Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Relationship Blueprint, Unlock Your Power of Connection. And today I have with me two people that have transformed my life, Wendy Patterson and Bob Patterson. And you've heard me, actually, episode 2 was with Wendy. If you have not listened to episode 2 from season 1, you're going to want to go back to that, perhaps maybe after you listen to this episode. And relational contracts are really one of their many specialties and something really new in the world and important to think about. And Bob Patterson is the Berkman consultant and therapist, imago therapist. But one of the things you've heard me say when I interviewed Brian Ames last week was how important it was when I received my Berkman from Bob and how I cried. Really, it helped me really see in black and white why I was unhappy in the job that I had prior to becoming an imago therapist. I wept because it all made sense to me that my creativity didn't allow me to really function well in a system. And it explained a lot about why I fought to change the system so much and bring yoga programs and mindfulness and things that maybe people weren't ready for at that time. So I'm always going to be grateful for that opportunity. And it's great for couples because Kevin and I had an old core story around him wanting to take a risk, have another office in Charleston. Or he'd have a great idea and I would be the first person to shoot it down. What we realized in the Berkman is that I scored in the first percentile in risk taking and Kevin scored in the 99th percentile. So when we could see, wow, this is just like who we are, it doesn't have anything to do with me not trusting Kevin, and it doesn't have anything to do with him not being sensitive to my fears. But now we had a language to talk about it. So between the two of you, it has been life-changing. And so I'm so excited to hear more from both of you today about relational contracts. Welcome, Bob and Wendy.
Thank you.
So shall I just set the stage a little bit?
That would be great.
Well, we've become loud advocates for this concept of the importance of, in relationship, making good contracts. And you'll hear us talk about that we think everyone has implicit contracts all the time. And we think when people get together in committed relationships, they're making a commitment to be in the relationship. So they're committing themselves. They're also making a contract with this other person. And over time, we think those contracts shift and change. And I came out of a training world where transactional analysis and Gestalt therapy were some of the earliest grounding pieces. And I'm a primarily family systems person. And what I know there is that it becomes really important that you're very thoughtful about what you're trying to accomplish at any moment in time. But Bob came out of the business world where he was always about that work. I really think we figured it out because we got in so much trouble as a couple, and it had a lot to do with our implicit agreements.
Wendy, can you help our listeners? Because implicit agreements is a familiar term in our world, but I don't know it's a familiar term in everyone's world. Can you give an example?
Probably the simplest one would be around that I think we had some implicit agreements and contracts in which my oldest child mentality was acceptable and his youngest child mentality was acceptable.
How did that play out?
I got to tell him what he should do, and he would kind of roll his eyes, but he would frequently do what I suggested until he got sick of it. And then he would say, "You're not the boss of me." And then I would say, "I'm not trying to be the boss of you. I'm trying to help you," because our contract was that he should work up and I should work down. And when we figured it out was a moment when Bob came to me and said, "I think that you love me and care about me and cherish me, but you said, Bob, I don't think you respect me." And I thought, I don't even have any idea what he's talking about, because I have 4 younger brothers, and so I adored them, but my dad died when I was a kid, so I didn't have any men to respect particularly, so it just wasn't a theme. And then he comes along and says, our marriage needs that to happen. And we started to fool around with that notion and came to that part of one of the greatest things you can do to communicate respect is make a conscious contract, make a conscious agreement about what's happening or going to happen, or what you want to see happen, because expectations, assumptions, all those things that get us in so much trouble in relationships are all based on implicit agreements. And they work for a while, but then they don't, if you're lucky, because you grow and you change. So we started working on, well, what kind of contract do we have and what kind of contract do we want to have? And then we started teaching it. What's your deal right now? What are the assumptions, and what do you have reason to believe that assumption would work? And what's a different story you could tell? And for me, that theme song of, am I operating out of respect or not, has been a very dominant feature for me, because it's not easy for me to operate out of respect. It's not something I learned and grew up with. So I now get that respect is, I don't tell you what to do unless you invite me. And I don't get to make things happen the way I want them to happen without actually being synergistic with you. And if I do, I'm going to get in trouble.
So, Wendy, let me just pause a minute here because you said so many important things. And I'm thinking about the imago languaging and the whole idea of intention and impact, right? And that's what you're saying, that you were a little unconscious before you got aware of how much your birth order was playing a role in all this. And I'm wondering, did this show up when you first got married, or did it take a little time?
Little time.
Yeah.
I think it's where the power struggle is so valuable. Romantic love, we're just enjoying. And then early challenge of starting babies and homes, it's like, let's just get things done.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
down the road a little bit before it's like, this doesn't.
I'm picturing you two as this young couple, and I'm picturing Wendy initially being like, let's go to Wyoming. I already bought the tickets. And Bob's like, yeah, what a great adventure. And then all of a sudden, Wendy's saying, I want to go to Pawleys Island. And Bob's
I say, we're going to
oh,
Polly.
we're going. Like, you're going definitely with me, and you're going to enjoy it. And then Bob's like, I had other plans. So it becomes the core scene, right? In
The core scene.
relationship. And
Shocking.
but I mean, don't we all have the
Yeah.
core scene, right? We
Okay.
don't know it
This is
because
what I think.
no one's ever really taught
Yeah.
us about that. Yeah.
We think that all conflict is growth trying to happen, right?
Yes.
We think that when you get into a power struggle, it's because you've actually outgrowing a pattern.
I love that.
And if you don't know
Yeah.
what the pattern is, how do you understand that you're outgrowing it? And that we think a lot of couples heading toward divorce saying, I've got to end my relationship with you. What they really want to be saying is, I've got to end the contract we've had
Yeah.
and let that go so we can move into a different scenario. And we haven't seen couples do that, and we need to.
Yeah.
It's also true in families, I think, as you're raising, for example, bless their hearts, teenagers. The contract you had as a parent with your little kids won't fly when you're parenting a teenager.
Absolutely. And then they don't fly when the teenagers become adults, right?
Yeah. So Bob's whole experience around business to be able to say, well, that's the way good business works. And we actually had a keynote at one of our conferences once who took the stance that we shouldn't even have marriage. We should form corporations. That would require the consciousness. And where we got so invested in intention and impact needing to match was through the contracting. And then lo and behold, it turns out it's also brain integration. That works both ways.
So, Bob, you were going to help us understand like the foundational principles of this relational contracting.
Okay, so we begin
First,
with,
you love what I said, didn't you, honey?
except for the part about being told what to do. I always react to that. Well, part of that is there were some relationships I had growing up that were challenging. And so in what Wendy is saying about us replicating those same patterns, I think really holds true. That it doesn't, I can go back to my family of origin, and it takes maybe 30 seconds for me to be right back in the midst of that power struggle. And that has been my theme song. You're not the boss of me. You don't get to order me around or tell me what, or maybe you do, but I'm not going to do what you want.
Yeah. Hey, but Bob, isn't that so interesting, for our listeners to think about? So you have this theme song that was, came from your experience growing up. And then Wendy has hers, which is, why would I even ask you? Like, I've had four little brothers, they don't know what they're doing, and I don't really have this dad, so I kind of have to run the show. So you found each other not by accident, right? So that these two things could show up together and poof, you're off to the races.
And I liked what you had said before, Coco, about in the romantic love stage, it doesn't matter a lot because nature has its own agenda in that contracting. So that contracting we don't even have to work on very much because it can just happen. But as we all know, as the commitment deepens, the power struggle intensifies. So that's why when you buy a home together or you get married or you have a dog or all the other things that you do that kind of say, I'm in this relationship at a different level, then we could do a better job of teaching couples that this is what's next. This is what's going to happen. The frustrations are going to occur because, like Wendy said, that is growth trying to happen. And it's just, we don't understand much about that. So it's easy to think that the problem is the other person.
Started
And
with familiarity, and
Yeah.
the familiarity kind of lulled us into implicit agreements. And then if we're strong enough and it's good enough, the familiarity begins to say, yeah, but we are different. And maybe our differences deserve a seat at the table.
Okay, well, so we started off thinking that the building these relationships that we're talking about is really a foundation of all human accomplishment. We can't get much cultural, technological, medical, transportation, science, arts, society. All of that is a result of us being in relationship with other human beings and animals. That our capacity to build and maintain these relationships creates really the synergy of civilization. And that for better or worse, that we are in these relationships and building these relationships all the time. And this is hardwired into us, is a part of all, we believe, all human beings, that we have this relational impulse. And so in families and groups, businesses, we form these emotional attachments to someone or something because that's what human beings do. We become attached. So if it's not a human being, then it could be money. You can develop an attachment for that, or power, philanthropy, politics, alcohol and drugs, sex, apple pie, sports. We have this is part of who we are, is to move through the world and form these attachments. And they can be extremely positive and sometimes problematic. So that while this is a necessary part of human development, the behavioral patterns that are associated with the attachment can be stressful on the relationships. And that's why we have, people who attach in certain ways. We talked about, the pursuer and the distancer getting together in a relationship and playing that pattern out.
Can you help us understand that, what you mean by the pursuer and the distancer? What does that look like in a real marriage?
When stress shows up,
Mhm.
all right, because we're moving out of romantic love and into the next stage. When the stress shows up, we've adapted to different behavioral patterns to deal with that stress. Some of us will move away from the stress, right? Some of us will move into the stress. Some of us will be very action oriented toward a stressful situation, and some of us are just going to move away. And sometimes with each other, that you'll have the one that is more talkative, that puts issues on the table. We need to talk. Anybody ever heard that? We need to talk.
Well, nobody feels good when they hear that. We need to sit down and have a conversation. And you're like, what did I do?
So that's, and so there's that chasing quality in some of us, or that pursuing quality. And then there's that more independent or distancing quality that some of us have. And that and that plays out in pretty much all relationships when you begin to look for it. You have the very social one with the more introverted one, and that kind of thing that that just seems to, I don't know, just the natural attraction.
What I've noticed too, and I think it's really important to mention to our listeners, is that sometimes the person that makes the appointment is this pursuer, right? We got to talk about this. We're going to go see a therapist and we got to blah, blah, blah. And then the other person comes in and they are the draggy. They don't know if they want to be there, right? They're like, why are we doing this? And then I think that what I've noticed is that the draggee or the distancer is also in their own way trying to protect the relationship, but it doesn't look like it, right?
Right.
Yeah, they're trying really hard by not saying anything. It's a way to not make it worse.
That is very insightful, Coco. Thank you for sharing that. That's that because the best way to work with contracts is that everybody has a side that they're trying to represent. Sometimes it might look like it's not very functional, but it always has this functionality to it. When the implicit contract or the non-conscious contract, a lot of times it happens around duties around the home, right? We just kind of drift into a job or something that has to get done. And maybe we don't even talk about it. It's just, I like to work in the garden. Wendy likes something else. And we just kind of naturally drift into that. And that's fine. It's when it's like the clothes begin to not fit anymore. And especially when the contracts are about how we treat each other.
Yeah.
Right. The one of the attachments that I noticed about myself is my kind of attachment to rationality and evaluation, right? So, and I will begin to do that even if I'm not aware of it. And so Wendy, being a very inspirational and creative person, will come up with these ideas. That one of them was, she'll just say, well, wouldn't it be nice if we put a garden bench here? And my approach to that is to evaluate the idea and whether it would fit or how would it get done or how would it be installed. All this stuff starts going off in my head. And what I've learned is that it's best to kind of ratchet that back and go slower, because if I'm not paying attention to that pattern, then I just become kind of a curmudgeon in Wendy's world about what won't work and what we have to be careful about. And so she's saying to me, well, you're always worried about something in the future and it's not happened yet, and that kind of thing. So you can just get into this. And then if you don't deal with it, you actually begin to detach.
Yeah.
Right.
I'll use this as an example of one thing, Coco. So one of the things that happened with this pattern he's talking about is I, of course, get extraordinarily frustrated because I wanted him to say, yes, I like it. No, I don't. Instead, he's logic and rational, and this is going to be hard, or this is going to be. And so one of the things that I've worked on shifting that I think we've come to agreement about is I say, so I want to pose an idea. I don't want to talk about implementing. I want to know if you like my idea or you don't like my idea. Just please, I like it, I don't like it, which has been extraordinarily hard sometimes for you because you're so busy analyzing the idea, but I can't tell if he liked it or not. Now, I've learned if he's analyzing the idea, he likes it enough to be exploring, but I couldn't tell that. I just wanted him to smile and say, great, that'd be so interesting, wouldn't it? And we'd be done. He was already down the road about, we used to talk about ready, fire, aim, that Bob was ready. No, it was supposed to be, what is it supposed to be? Ready, aim, fire. That's
right.
What
it's supposed to be that. Yeah.
But Bob is ready, fire, aim. And I'm aim, aim, aim. Right. And we have those misses. And so it's become, I now know if I throw out an idea and what I get is the logistics, I've missed a step and he has missed a step, and we need to back it up and tweak out what is it I'm really wanting right now and what is he really wanting right now, because he interprets my great thoughts as he's got a responsibility.
Yeah. Yeah.
Took
I'm
me a while to
picturing you in
understand
the
that.
garden about this bench right now and thinking about our listeners who, a similar situation, whether it's garden or putting the children in this school or that school, and that dynamic goes on. And then that detachment when it's not resolved and
Yeah.
people don't feel understood. And then, you go to bed mad, or you don't even sleep in the same room, or then you start collecting all the other things that they've done that make you so unhappy. And before you know it, our brains are wired for that, right? To think, we're incompatible. This is just, I can't do this anymore, right? It's so fast.
And part of that is around our decision-making styles, of course. So most of us are attached in some way or another to money. And so we can make these implicit agreements about how we are going to manage money coming into and going out of the house. And so it just invites control, manipulation, if we're not pretty clear about what our deal is, right? And how we negotiate that deal, which is going to need to change at some point anyway. Like Wendy and I have this kind of unstated agreement that I will pay the credit card bills, right? And so what happens is I'm paying the credit card bills, and it's frustrating, or I'm having I don't like what I'm doing, or anxious about the money, or whatever. And then I begin to express all that, right? Then that's one of the signs that we either need to renegotiate or have a new contract about addressing all these boxes that show up on our doorstep. And it's kind of how, to me, it seems like we're just being covered up in boxes. And then, my
They're all
beloved.
very important and necessary.
I think every couple in the world can relate to you right now. Someone's ordering the boxes.
And so, and my beloved loves the gadgets, right? And some of the gadgets are useless, in my opinion, and some of the gadgets are wonderful, right? I just, but I've had to learn, our contract has to include something like, trying out the gadget for a while.
Because you never know. And by the way, you've gotten so much kinder and gentler. And that's an interesting gadget. Is this important? Is this valuable? At which point we fight.
Yeah. So, so these attachments to either children or money or something like that, it's great just every now and then just say, well, how are we doing around this? Because we don't do that, we begin to function dysfunctionally. Like if, I may just stop paying the credit card, right? Or something like that without talking about it. Or I start thrashing about, complaining, which, it just doesn't do any good.
Right.
It's back to what you said about decision-making differences. I talk some more about that.
Some of us become attached to kind of I'll deal with it if it shows up kind of mentality. And others of us want to prepare for every eventuality.
That's a good example.
And so, but if you could make a deal about it and say, okay, so my job is to look at the potential pitfalls.
Yeah.
I take that's my job. And the other can go, cool, you're really good at that. And my job will be to just carry the energy of we'll deal with it when, at least it still happens. So then, you might compromise about making a broad plan for the future, but you don't drill into the details of it until it actually happens. So it's just, it's no big secret. It's just being able to every once in a while stop and look, right? Just not try to make it perfect, but just to look at what our agreements are. Like when we have agreement that I drive the car most of the time, right? And it has worked for both of us because I'm a lot more relaxed when I'm driving, and Wendy's a lot more relaxed when I'm driving. But every once in a while, it's good to talk about it and shift some things up, change some things so that Wendy drives more. And it just kind of reminds us that the implicit contract is not bad as long as at some points it's examined.
To re-examine a wonderful example of where this all, because it changes over time. A couple of years ago, he said to me, it is really okay with me for you to tell me what the street signs are and that the cars are coming,
right.
Somebody's emerging. I give you full permission to do that from now forward. And it was a very different contract because, of course, all of my be careful, look out, did you see, didn't go over well.
I can only imagine.
I know. And so but when he did that, it was like he was aware of my anxiety and he was giving me permission to speak. And he was also saying, I really accept that there may be things you see I don't see. And if you see the same thing I see and bring it up, it'll be okay. It was a different level of agreement between us that eased the way even more. And we think that's what consciousness looks like. How are we changing?
I love this because I don't think that any couple escapes this. I don't even think when you're doing things with a friend you can escape this. Traveling with people, right? It's just part of human nature. But I what I'm hearing about the driving the car thing is that really for the most part it doesn't bring either of you stress. So sometimes when it's working, there's not the impulse or need to change it. However, you want to stretch and grow, so you may move into more things like, wow, so Wendy, you do offer these things, and when you do, it kind of annoys me, but now I can see that it actually is kind of helpful because we have four eyes looking at the road. But without that renegotiation of how you're going to do things where it's verbalized, it could get really annoying being the driver. And by the time you get there, you're kind of mad at your partner because you felt controlled, right? And then Wendy doesn't feel safe because she saw something coming and she wasn't heard. So you're at the event, you're really not even talking when you get there because all because of a car. I know I've been there. It brings up a story that Kevin and we did a dance for a really long time when we travel. Kevin's more the laid back, unpacking and organizing and being really anal about things. And then we'd get to the airport and he turns into this person that, like, if the coffee spills, it's all my fault. And I started to notice the patterns, and I'm like, we need a dialogue about it. And when we did, it just brings up so much anxiety for him that he's forgot something, if the plane's late, all the millions of things that you could think. So now when we're in the airport and he snaps at me, which he normally doesn't, so it's kind of like it used to be like, what? I didn't do anything wrong. Now I just will lean over and like hold his arm or something and ask him, what do you need? Because I see it as a real need. When I'm anxious, he does reach in and help me most of the time, but my anxiety is a little more obvious, whereas his was really very situational.
Well, there's a nice example too of taking a conflict or frustration and assuming it's friction and something's trying to happen. And instead of right, wrong, which of course we know there's never right, wrong, they're both right. I have to be able to say what's trying to happen.
Yeah.
And we're both trying to take care of our anxiety, or we're both trying to, and if I know what's happening for him, but I can't if I don't have a little bit of curiosity about what's happening for him. And just because he stepped on my toe doesn't make it all about me and my toe. I got to be able to say, and let's work on how we're standing and where we are together. And that's a very, it's like a growing up kind of experience of how do I want to be in the world. And it poses one of the big questions that we both, the book that I loved the most before I found Getting the Love You Want was the one question that would save your marriage. And the question was, what's it like being married to me? And all these iterations. And that reflection is not something you can easily do on your own, but you can take the feedback and say, well, is this working? What part of this is working? And every contract we think couples have started off as working, particularly the implicit. It worked fine until it didn't.
Yeah.
Where this gets really important is when about our attachment to our values. Because we, how, and having a non-conscious contract about your politics can be devastating. That's why I think it's important to examine sometimes what's going on between us and really look at how are we going, let's come to an agreement about how we handle this situation.
So how important is that right now with family and the difference in our country? Like, to be able to have a contract, how will we treat each other when we disagree?
Right.
Yes. And so that's a good one to talk about and come to some kind of deal or agreement about how we navigate through these minefields, really, that are about our identity, our values, what we love, what we think, all that, even if it's something we're going to agree that we won't put each other down about what we think or believe. One couple I was working with where he just wanted to express himself, right? But the way he was doing it, she felt evaluated, put down. They have to stop and look at that and come to an agreement or a deal that he's got some other people he could talk to about that. Can't just be her. Right? So it is really an important aspect of our relational life to make these deals and be as conscious as we can. I mean, we're just doing the best we can here about how we treat each other. Going back to the Berkman for a minute, one of the components around the Berkman is how we communicate, whether we're very direct and kind of frank about our communication or we're the more diplomatic about how we pay attention to delivery and how we say things, right? But underneath that is the need, right? Some people need a more direct kind of communication style. They don't get it. If you're not direct with them, they kind of say, well, what are you talking about? And some of us have a need for a more respectful or diplomatic approach to us.
Sound like us, does it?
My style tends to be a little more on the diplomatic end in terms of my usual behavior. Wendy's style tends to be more direct and I won't say in your face, but at times, it's frank.
But I work on it.
She works on it. But her need is very different, right? Her need is for me to communicate with her in terms of respect, diplomacy, pay attention to how I say things to her. Most of the time we treat each other the way we act, right? So if somebody has a very direct and pointed communication style, we tend to immediately give that to them when it may not be what they need at all. And that's really important in terms of our contracting, because sometimes our communication is one of the biggest problems we've got in terms of reaching some kind of agreement.
Probably frequently. Toward that end, I want to give you a how-to from my point of view. Because I don't always have self-awareness of how I'm coming across. So the deal we've worked on and the explicit contract is you state intention. Bob, I'd like to talk to you about ... And what I want from this conversation is your yes or your no. Or what I want from this conversation is just for you to listen to me and hug me and tell me you're sorry, I feel bad. If I make myself tell him what I want from him, what my intention in bringing this up is, before I launch, the most of the time, it's a safer close. But if I start and I don't say my intention is, so we've gotten a lot better. What's your intention? What would this look like if it's a good outcome? What are you hoping to get out of this? So we can get more on the same page. And that dramatically changes how those communication differences land.
I just want to say that for our listeners, that Wendy and Bob are sought after speakers all over the world, South Korea, you name it. And they're being so vulnerable with us today about their own relationship and how challenging it is, even when you know these things, because so much of what we bring to a relationship is our old stories and our reactivity and our defenses and things that worked for us when we were kids. And then we get into these intimate relationships and they're so hard. It's very refreshing, I believe, to hear you talking about the things you're still working and growing on with, because how long have you been married?
We just celebrated our 44th anniversary.
Wow.
And that's 44 years for Wendy and 44 years for me. So it's really 88 years.
I love that.
We each have our own view of what this relationship is, and they both count.
Bob, your Berkman also really helped me understand when you were talking about, so this is my behavior, my normal behavior. I'm very diplomatic in my approach. And then under stress, I become brutally direct.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So, it does impact people more when I'm direct or when I get really quiet, because that's just not my normal way of behavior and what I've learned from both of you is really paying attention to my reactivity. And when I find myself being really short with people or very direct, it's almost like I'm saying to them, what is wrong with you that you don't get what I'm saying? It's so direct.
Yeah.
But when I find myself doing that, really managing my own reactivity, because the intention I have might be a good one, but the impact is awful.
And the beauty of what you said is the idea that we take responsibility for our impact,
Yeah.
because we want to be innocent. And one of the big couplehood problems is you misunderstood me. That's not what I meant. You're so sensitive. It's you, as opposed to, that sure didn't land the way I hoped it would land. But often I think the question is, did I even know how I wanted it to land? Did I even know what I wanted to get from you, or was I just opening mouth and blurting? And I can open mouth and blurt with Bob, but I need a deal. I need to say, can I just blah, blah, blah? And he knows then that his job is to hold reactivity and be responsive to me and maybe smile at me and say, is there more? So that I get a chance to do that. And then to say, shall we take this into some functional place or operational place? And then we're synergistic.
I'm a fixer, right? So if you put a situation out there, that's immediately where I go, right? But again, it's about knowing the person well enough to know what is that need that's driving that behavior. If I can slow down enough to remember that if Coco's being really direct and overly aggressive, she's under stress, right? That's a stress reaction. And so if she's acting that way, that's when I can say, oh, I get it. So what would be a good reaction to that stressful situation? And sometimes, so what I can do is I can listen, right? Reduce the stress, and then Coco or whoever can go back to being their diplomatic, sensitive self.
But isn't it important, though, to be able to do that for me? I had to really disclose what was about within me. I had to really look at that, going back to the personal responsibility, because otherwise it may be hard for the other person to even kind of interpret what that directness is about. But once you've had a conversation and I've been vulnerable when I say, gosh, I act this way and I'm not proud of it, but boy, it does happen to me when I'm under stress and I'm sorry. Then they can do what you just suggested, Bob, which is to say, wow, so she's under stress right now because I can see that directness popping out, and then ask for what I need.
I know that if Wendy is avoiding me, that's a very strong communication, right? And what that probably means is I've gotten into my fix it, evaluate, prepare for the worst. That I do that normal thing that I do, or I've rained on her parade in some way. And so she's just gone. And so that's a very powerful communication that, I've got some cleanup to do, right? Because I was just unconscious I was just doing my same old thing,
Yeah.
right? And, the same old thing in some ways has helped me a lot, but in some ways it gets in my way as well. I think the main thing I think about this contracting thing is just, slow things down a bit, especially if you're feeling resentful. If you're feeling resentful, it's probably about a contract that has expired.
Yeah.
Or is in the process of expiring, like your credit card does. It expires. So you got to get a new one. And if we could just think a little bit more like that, then we could, live in a little more peace and calm, I think.
Yeah, and stay connected, because it isn't the
Really,
big
yeah.
things that keep us disconnected many times, although they do and they can. But I think these day-to-day things that you're talking about, like we've had a new baby and I used to do all the grocery shopping, but now like I can't do it all, and how we renegotiate that contract with each other because needs have changed, right? The family situation has changed. Well, is there anything else that we haven't covered today? I've so enjoyed our time together that you really want to say before we sign off.
I want to invite Wendy to maybe just say a few words about the foundation of relational contracting as it relates to caring, power, and responsibility. I think that would be a good wrap up.
Okay.
Would you be willing to do that, Wendy?
Oh, see, now there was a nice contract.
There was a nice
We
contract.
also talk about mini contracts, just interactive moments that living that way it's just a kindness. May I respond? Would you tell me what you think? That kind of thing. So in relationships, we think you could make an assumption that when things aren't in flow, there is a challenge, right? All frustrations should be challenges. The challenge is when it's in a relationship standpoint, that's true families or couples, is that somehow the experience of feeling cared for has been challenged. And that often happens when I can't see that you see me and know me, compassion. Or when the power experience is more hierarchical, less respectful, as I said earlier, and I'm pushing against the power experience because part of Bob's early teaching was around positive power and influence. And what does that look like? And we think to have power in a relationship is a given. How do you make it power that's positive power? And then that experience about respect, which is often around who's got responsibility for what. And a lot of the thing for us, I think, around respect is I see you and I value what you do. We went through a period of time a few years ago where we got this, and we got really intentional for a period of time about noticing. I noticed that you empty the dishwasher. I really appreciated that. Hey, I see that you've cleaned out this drawer. Or I would drive him over and say, look at this closet. And he'd say, wow. And the positives of it were gas in the tank. And we had several friends go, ooh, why are you so nice to each other all the time? We said, because it
Helps when people notice what we do, right?
CPR for couples, we call it.
Say that again, please.
CPR for couples.
CPR for couples. I love that. I love
Compassion, power, and respect.
And I think we could think about it in so many different ways. I was just thinking about before we got on today, I was running errands because we're going to see our kids in Greenville tomorrow. And I needed to do this errand and I wasn't sure I'd have time. And I just texted Kevin, will you do this? And for me, that's a stretch because my story growing up is I have to do everything myself. And so asking is a risk because he might not do it. It's easier to do it myself.
Oh, exactly.
Right. So I think this consciousness that we're all talking about is so much around self-awareness and knowing that we have outgrown our contract.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's a really good thing. It's just a scary thing.
It is scary. We've been doing this a while and it's scary. But I sent that text and I was aware like, ooh,
Yeah.
you want to
And
do
that's the
that?
last part I'd say, Coco, is also we better adjust because if we're going to be together long term and as most of us want to be, we're going to keep changing. Life is going to keep changing. And
Absolutely.
what's the deal that has to happen right now?
Yeah, what is the growth trying to happen for both of us in this situation? Who's driving the car? Who's going to get the toy at Target? Whatever the thing is it looks small, but we really have a big dynamic going on. And I want to
Thank you
thank
for asking us. This is so fun.
it. Well, it is so fun. I think the three of us share, and Kevin as well, this passion for helping other people learn about different ways of thinking about relationship, and just a shift in perception can really change so much. And nobody taught us how to do these things growing up. We didn't come with a manual for marriage. So this podcast, The Relationship Blueprint, is about helping you unlock your power. And you can't unlock your power until you're aware of it and you're aware of how your intention may or may not match the impact that you want. And one of the questions I keep coming back to recently is, is what I'm doing effective? Not judging it, just is it effective? And if it's not effective, let's talk about it. I am grateful to Bob and Wendy today. They have a workshop coming up. Do you want to talk about that?
So this is the Getting the Love You Want workshop. We do one of these a year, and this one is coming up at the end of March, where we'll be in person. Since the pandemic, a lot of these workshops have been online, but once a year we do this one in person here in Atlanta. So just invite folks to go to our website, imagogeorgia.com, and there's a lot of information there about the workshop, and if you have an interest, how to sign up. So
Absolutely. And you won't be able to find another place to study how to really improve your relationship better than Getting the Love You Want workshop, and with Bob and Wendy Patterson. Signing off, everybody. Thank you again. We're in 250 cities. We are in 29 countries, and we're growing because you're sharing and liking and commenting on Apple and Spotify. We're also on YouTube. And just remember the relationship blueprint, unlock your power of connection, and how connection is at the heart of our health. And without connection, we fall apart. Thank you, everybody, for being here, and we'll see you next time on The Blueprint.